I've always had a passion for teaching. I just like helping people. It makes me really proud when other people achieve and do really well. I'm Melanie Walker, and this is my story. AAT tutoring has really had a massive impact on my life. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Going from not knowing what tomorrow looked like to now working for a fantastic employer, being able to tutor and help students to achieve.
I know it sounds a bit cheesy to say, it's a bit of the dream. I'm actually more excited when my students get their results than when I get mine.
Melanie as a tutor is just absolutely incredible. She knows exactly how to explain things to students that they will understand.
I've been tutoring online learners and helping self-studiers for over a year now and teaching in the classroom for about 7 months. I studied level 2 and level 3. Then I moved on to do awarding education and training level 3 to become a teacher. And now I'm studying level 4 as well to expand my knowledge.
AAT has meant that I can go back to work 1 day a week and teach all day and help others. Obviously, financially, it's been a massive help. I can still put my body, my health and my family first and not put myself under any stress.
I love spending time with my family, whether it's just hanging out in the park, feeding the ducks, shooting some hoops, or just chilling out and playing a board game together.
AAT's kind of fitted like a glove for Melanie. Like seeing Melanie achieve her results, she's just glowing. She can't keep the excitement inside and she wants to do more.
Melanie helps by showing you what is possible and what roads there is to go down with accountancy and how confident you can be at it, because accountancy is more than just Excel spreadsheets.
My mum's journey has inspired me to be more determined, to show me that one thing won't stop your life, you can always find another path.
AAT tutoring has definitely changed my life. It gives me so much fulfilment. It means that I can then give that back and be there for my family.
Hello everyone, welcome in and thanks for joining us on this Facebook Live. It's Jaden from the online community team and I'm glad you can join us. This session will be on the Principles of Costing module under Level 2 and the subtopic covered today will be Mastering Overhead Absorption. But as we always do, I do want to give some shout outs to everyone that commented. So super quick, let me just have a look. I want to give a shout out to Helen, Philip, Sarah, Natasha Jade, Haley, Cara, Kat, Susan, Heather, Laura, Emma Louise, Melissa, Erica, everyone that left a comment. We do super appreciate it. Again, super happy that you're all here. So thanks again. So last time I did ask you all what you wanted from these lives, and again I appreciate everyone that left a comment for that, and I've noted all of your suggestions down, but this is now a follow-up question from that. So I'd like to ask you guys, and we did ask this last week on the feed, but what time do you consume live content ideally? So obviously for my live audience, you're all here, which I appreciate. So we know that you can make this time work, but obviously feel free to let us know whether this 12 to 1 p.m. slot works for you, or if you have another preference within reason, of course. But also for the viewers watching on demand, this question does apply to you too. So if you can let us know in the comments, that would be amazing. So while you guys do that, I'll introduce our guest who many of you probably already know now for various reasons, but it's Training Links, Will Boardman. How's it going, Will?
Yeah, good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Glad to have you on. So, again, super briefly, for those who don't know who you are, just give us a quick overview of who you are and what you do in your role.
Yeah, so my name's Will. I'm an AAT tutor for Training Link. So what we do, Training Link, we are a distance learning provider. So we deliver AAT Level 1 through to Level 4. Obviously, this session is designed at Level 2 students, although Still useful for level 3 and 4 because of the topic. Obviously, I'll come back to that. But yeah, we are a distance learning provider. Create our own materials, write our own books, and deliver distance learning courses for AAT.
Amazing. So, I'm just going to hand over to Will in a second, but I do want to urge everyone to write any questions you've got regarding the session down in the comments, and we will get to them throughout the session. So we'll have a couple of stopping points where we'll stop and answer any questions that you have. All right. So yeah, over to you, Will, whenever you're ready.
Excellent. Okay, so let's just get these slides up and then I can make a start. Okay, so I've already said from the introduction, this is a session for principles of costing, which is a level 2 unit, and we'll be running through absorption costing and specifically overhead absorption. So this is something that is introduced at level 2, but you will take it through to level 3 and 4 if you do plan on going on to those after your level 2. However, I will be doing this more from a level 2 perspective, so starting from the basics and going all the way through into an example. So any questions that you do have, please obviously do put them in the chat box, and I'll pick those up throughout and at the end as well. Okay, so let's get into it with a bit of an overview of absorption costing. So the aim of absorption costing is to determine the full production cost per unit of a product. Okay, so what I want you to think about is think of the costs that go into producing a unit of production. So we have some common ones that we should know, which are materials, we've got labor, we've got expenses, that being direct expenses, but we also have overheads. Now, I think it's quite easy to think about the costs that directly go into making a product, so the materials and labor, because it's really easy to know roughly or exactly, you would hope, the cost of the material that goes into producing one unit, or the cost of the labor that goes into producing one unit. Now, if we just add together all those variable costs of producing one unit, that makes up what we call the marginal cost of a product. Okay, and a simple way of thinking about that is if we add those variable costs together and they come to £10, then to make one unit would be £10, to make 2 units would be 20, to make 3 would be 30, and so on. Now, with absorption costing, what we're trying to do is think of the full production cost of making that unit or that product. Now, what we need to do with that in mind is we need to bring in the costs, or what I should call the overhead costs. Okay, now the overhead costs are stuff like your factory. Now for AAT, we'll be focusing just on the production overheads. So those costs, as I said, could be the factory costs. It could be supervisors' salaries. And this comes with a sort of extra level of complication because they're not quite as easy to determine the cost for one unit. Now, in simple terms, what we need to do is find a way of spreading those overhead costs into the individual units. And what we do is we, as I said, effectively take those overheads and we spread them across all the units or products that we make. Okay. So what we'll be doing within this session really is looking at how do we do that and what methods have we got of doing that. Okay. So before we do that, okay, what we end up with is something like this. Okay. So to get the total production cost of one unit, it would be the direct materials going into making one unit, the direct labor, any direct expenses, which are less common, but they do exist, and then the production overheads. And that will give us the total production cost. Now, the reason why this is useful in particular is when it comes to pricing the product. Okay. Now, if we base our selling price purely off the direct costs, okay, so if we just took our direct material, direct labor, direct expenses, and sold the product and came up with a selling price just based upon those, we're not then covering our production overheads. So we're effectively just ignoring the factory costs, the supervisor costs, the machinery usage. We're just ignoring those and basing the selling price purely on the cost of making the product. Now, by creating or coming up with the total production cost, we can far more accurately then price our product so that we are covering those production overheads, okay? Because obviously they do exist, we can't just ignore them, okay? So let's first think of this simple way of doing this, okay? And I'll explain how this works and the good side of it and obviously the sort of limitations of it. Okay, so the easiest way of doing this is to take our production overheads, so whatever figure that may be, and that will be given to you as part of your exam, and divide it by the total number of units. Okay, now all this does is obviously it just splits your production overhead figure evenly across all the units that that business makes. Okay, so for example, if we had £100,000, we use nice simple figures here, £100,000 of production overheads, and we made 50,000 units, then all we do is take our production overheads and divide it by the number of units, and that would give us an overhead recovery of £2 per unit. Okay, the idea being that then for every unit that we make and sell, we've recovered £2 of our overheads. Okay, now that's all well and good. Okay, that's obviously really straightforward and works really well if we make one type of product. Okay, if we only make one type of product, brilliant. Okay, no need to really do anything else. We can just use this as a simple method and it would work perfectly. The problem is when we make multiple products, okay? Because then we might have a bit of an issue. Oh, how do I go back? Go back one, there we go. Now, if we make more than one product, the chances are that we spend more or less time on each product. Now, if we take longer to produce one product than another, but we just split our overhead equally across all units, that obviously isn't a particularly accurate reflection. Okay, and if we took like a really extreme example, okay, where a business made something, you know, where they made millions of units on something that they sold for £1, and then they made another product that took 3 weeks to make and they sold for 100,000. I'm using like extreme examples here. By splitting them evenly across all units, what you're effectively doing is putting the exact same amount of overhead to the product that literally could take minutes to the one that takes 3 weeks. Okay. So obviously that doesn't seem quite fair. Obviously, you're not going to get an accurate price either. Okay, so it becomes a problem for the business. So what they need to do is they need to look at a different method of splitting your overheads over your products. Okay, and we do that through two methods, or one, you could pick either method, and I'll speak about that shortly. So we can either use labor hours, or we can use machine hours or machine time. Okay, so rather than dividing our overheads over the number of units, instead we divide them either by the total number of labor hours or the total number of machine hours. And what we then get is an overhead absorption rate per hour rather than per unit. Okay. Now, in terms of which one to use, so whether we use labor hours or whether we use machine hours, it all really depends on the business, because some businesses will create products that are far more labor intensive than what they are machine intensive. Now, if you use a lot more labor hours than you do machine hours, then you would absorb based upon labor hours because you'll get a more accurate result. However, if you use more machine hours than you do labor hours, which is obviously in the world we are now going to be far more common, then you would pick to absorb based upon machine hours rather than labor hours. Okay, so if it's a more automated business, we're going to absorb based upon machine hours. If it's more labor intensive, then labor hours. Okay, so to get our overhead absorption rate, all we would do is take our production overheads and either divide them by the total number of labor hours if we're using labor time, or by the total number of machine hours if we're using machine hours. Okay. So by doing that, we're going to get an overhead absorption rate, and that's either going to be based on labor hours or machine hours. Okay. We can then apply that overhead absorption rate to our products. Okay. So if we just bring back our table and chair again, just using simple examples, if our table took 5 hours to make and our chair took 2 hours to make, we would therefore absorb more overhead into the table than we would into the chair. Okay, so that is the concept that we are sort of working from for absorption costing. This is the way that we get our overhead costs into our individual units, and therefore being able to price our products more accurately. Okay. So hopefully what I've said makes sense so far. I'm just going to stop at this point and ask Jaden, have we got any questions about what we've covered?
Hey, so we do have one question that was asked towards the beginning. I'm not sure if it was covered, but I will ask it. So Philip asked, where does inventory valuation fit with calculating profits?
Ooh, so that's not necessarily to do with what we're doing here. Okay, so that would be something quite different from what we're covering. Assuming we're referring here to sort of FIFO, LIFO, and AVCO. I don't know if Philip could come back on that, then
Yeah, we could.
I mean, that's sort of a session in itself.
Yeah.
I can sort of briefly answer that if we do get an answer, an answer back.
Not to worry. That was the only one, but again, do just want to let everyone know. Yeah, get your questions in. We will be able to answer them if you do have any at all. If not, that's also not a problem. Philip did come back and say sorry. Yes, LIFO and FIFO.
Yeah, no need to apologise. I mean, I'm more than happy to answer that briefly. It is a bit of a tangent, but no need to apologise. It's all in terms of your FIFO, LIFO, and AVCO. It's different methods in which we can value a business's inventory. Okay, now in terms of how that affects profit, it shouldn't be something that you do too deeply at level 2. It will have an effect on profit because it affects how the business values its inventory. So you will get a different valuation depending on which method you use. Okay, the assumption is that if you're using, FIFO is first in, first out. So the first products, they don't necessarily have to be in literal order, but the first prices that you buy them in at are the first ones to go out. So that will have an effect on profit because your inventory valuation goes into your statement of profit or loss. Now that is something you will examine a lot more in detail at level 3. It's not something you should really have to touch on too much at level 2. But yes, it will have an effect on your profit because it has an effect on the overall inventory valuation, which makes up part of your statement of profit or loss. Okay.
Okay, perfect. Many thanks for that. Hopefully that answered your question, Philip. We did get another question from Heather that just came in and said, can you just run through how you would split the OAR between these two, please, or the OR?
Yeah, so it's very, very good question. And it's something that I'll be going on to now within the example, because that is exactly how we need to treat these going forward. So what we will do is we will be now taking that overhead absorption rate and we will be applying it to the individual products to see how those overheads are absorbed into each one. Okay, so like I said, just sort of picking up from where we left off, because the table takes 5 hours to make and the chair takes 2 hours to make, obviously the table would absorb more overhead than the chair would. Okay, and that will then reflect in our pricing decisions, because obviously, as I said, the table will absorb more overhead. Okay, so let's flip into an example now and have a look how this would work, and we'll produce a little cost card at the end to see what it looks like. Okay, so Fletcher & Co produced 2 products, product A and product B, because Fletcher & Co have a lack of imagination when it comes to naming their products. So you have been provided with the following information and asked to calculate the absorption cost of producing each product. So you can see within our table here, we've got some information for both product A and product B. So we've got direct materials for each product, we've got direct labour for each product, and these are all per unit figures so far. And then we've got the labour time per unit, so 1 hour for product A, 1.5 hours for product B. We then have the budgeted number of units, so 5,600 are planned to be made for product A and 9,600 for product B. Okay, we then have our production overheads for the business, which are 60,000. Okay, and we've been asked to calculate the absorption cost of producing each product. Okay, so we've already got our variable costs on there, which are our direct materials and direct labour. But what we're wanting to try and do now is find what is the production cost for 1 unit of product A and 1 unit of product B. Okay, so I think it's fairly clear to see in this example that we're going to be doing this, we're going to be absorbing based upon labour rather than machine hours. Okay, that should be made fairly clear within any questions that you're working on anyway, just to sort of give you a heads up on that. Okay, so let's think about the first step. So to get our overhead absorption rate, remember the formula we need to use for this. It's the production overheads, so our 60,000, over the total number of labour hours. Now that means we've got another step in this question, because we've not been given the total number of labour hours. But what we have been given is the labour time per unit and the budgeted number of units for each product. So from that information, we are able to calculate the total number of labour hours that are required for this business to be able to produce both products A and B. So step 1, we need to calculate the total number of hours. So to do that, it will be our 1 hour for product A multiplied by 5,600 units. So obviously 5,600 hours. But for product B, it would be 1.5 hours times by 9,600 units. Okay. So we can see the calculations on screen now. So product A, we've got 5,600 times 1 hour. Product B, 9,600 units times by 1.5 hours. So that then gives us, if we add the 2 hours together, 2 sets of hours together, the total number of hours to produce all this business's units for product A and B. So the total number of labour hours is our 5,600 plus our 14,400 to give us a total number of labour hours of 20,000. Okay, so the next step is to calculate our overhead absorption rate per labour hour. And to do that, we take our production overheads of £60,000 and divide that by the 20,000 hours, so the total number of labour hours. Okay, so we can see the calculation on screen now. And that gives this business an overhead absorption rate of £3 per labour hour worked. Okay, so what we're saying is for every hour that we work on a product, we should be recovering £3 of our overheads. Okay, so we would need to include for every hour that we make at least £3 worth of overhead. So what we can now do is we can use our overhead absorption rate to see how much overhead should be absorbed into product A and then into product B. Now for product A, that's really straightforward. Okay, it's £3 per labour hour. It takes 1 hour to produce 1 unit of product A. So it would simply be £3 times 1 hour to give you £3 of production overhead per product A. Now for product B, because it takes 1.5 hours to produce in labour time, it would be £3, which is your overhead absorption rate, multiplied by 1.5 hours, because it takes 1.5 hours to produce 1 unit. And therefore there would be £4.50 worth of production overhead to be absorbed per unit. Okay. So what we can now do is bring that back into our, bring that alongside our direct materials and direct labour to give us the full production cost per product or per unit of product. Okay, so that would look something like this. So we can see we've got our direct materials taken straight from our table, direct labour again taken straight from our table because this is per unit. And now we've added the production overhead cost per unit. So that was our £3 and our £4.50 to give us the total absorption cost per unit. So £25.60 for product A and £32.90 for product B. Okay, and then we can price our products to sell based upon these total absorption costs per unit. Okay, so that might be that I'm not going to get into too much detail, but you add on a certain profit margin on top of these, okay, a certain markup or profit margin to get your selling price. Okay, and that way we know that we've covered all the direct costs and the overhead cost, the production overhead cost. Okay, and that genuinely is I say as simple as that. Obviously, we've only gone through one example there, but hopefully that has made sense. Okay, now if we were to use machine time, okay, it would be the exact same process. Nothing would change except that you'd be dividing based on machine time rather than labour time, but the process is identical. Okay, and for your level 2, I would expect definitely nothing more complicated than this within a scenario. Okay. So hopefully that has made sense. Okay. If you do have any questions at all, please do pop them in the chat box and I will pick those up for you. Have we got anything, Jaden?
Okay, so nothing so far, but again, just going to wait a little while to see if you guys have any questions in relation to the session at all. So we'll just do a brief pause to see if anything comes through. But if not, then yeah, I'll be happy to hand back over to yourself. Not a question, but Melissa did say this is great. Thanks.
Oh, good. Excellent.
We will take that. Many thanks.
Absolutely. So all I would do is, because that finishes off the example for this session, all I'd say is this is a process. Okay, so I would not expect any sort of curveballs with these types of questions. And I do appreciate there's a lot of numbers being thrown around, and this has been noted as definitely one of the more challenging aspects to this particular unit. It always has been as well. Okay, so if this is something you found quite tough to get your head around, please don't panic because it's definitely not just you. There is, as I said, a lot of numbers being thrown around, but it is a process. You just need to follow that process through. Try and understand what you're doing as you work through, rather than just remembering the formulas as well, because I think that's where people get confused, because if it puts it in a slightly different format, like in this example, we had to figure out the total number of hours first. Okay, try and remember the process, okay, of what you need to do. Try and understand what it is you're doing. Okay, and I don't think it will cause any problems. But like I said, if it is something you've struggled with a little bit in the past, please don't panic, because it's not just you. It is one of the more challenging areas for this unit. Okay, and like I said, you know, really, really worthwhile getting your head around, because you will use it at level 3 and at level 4 as well, if you continue through those levels. Okay, I think that about wraps it up. Like I say, if any other questions, if there are any other questions, more than happy to answer them. But that does cover what I wanted to in this session.
Okay, amazing. So, yeah, again, just want to thank everyone for attending. Want to thank Will again for this amazing top-notch session. You know, it was a level 2 one, but I feel like it was a really, really solid session. Very brisk, very quick, just how we like it. It was top-notch. Thank you again, Will, for attending. And I was going to say, was there anything you wanted to add at the end about yourself or Training Link?
Yeah, nothing specific. Obviously, will we be putting this session on YouTube?
Yes, indeed.
Excellent. Okay, so obviously there's a chance to ask questions on there as well in the comments. But yeah, I think other than that, it's just any comments, even after this, within the Facebook Live, about requests for sessions, getting some ideas for sessions, I think is always a good idea as well. Obviously, I will always try and pick topics that I know people struggle with. But if there's common themes that are coming up from people, then, you know, we can always look to put a session on, can't we? So.
Absolutely. So, yeah, if you guys have any topics that you have in mind, of course, let us know, and we can absolutely work towards getting a session sorted for that. So, yeah, again, huge shout out to Will. Many thanks to Will and Training Link for this session. And of course, I want to thank everyone for joining and being a part of this Facebook Live. So do remember that these sessions are recorded. So as I alluded to before, the session will be available on YouTube, but it's also available here on Facebook as well. So if you just want to stay within the platform, you're absolutely welcome to. You can find that within the video section shortly after the session is finished. So, yeah, for additional content, news, and memes, of course, remember to follow us on Facebook if you haven't already. Of course, follow us on Instagram. We're on LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, and Threads as well. So yeah, again, thanks everyone for joining us. Bye for now.